Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Delve. Now, we've learned all we need to create an inventory system, and by God, today we're finishing this thing. Now, last time we worked on laying the foundation for interacting with our inventory system, focusing heavily on the drag state and maintaining information while in that state. And today, at long last, we're putting the finishing touches on this bad boy. The plan is to not only flesh out the drag state, but add item stacking and item swapping, stack splitting, and additional mouse functionality that you normally see in grid-based inventory systems. Indeed, we've got a ton to get to, and again, because this takes so much concentration, the lovely post commentary is here to wrap it all up for you. So let's get started, shall we? The first thing I had to do was reacquaint myself with the code. Taking a week off to work on other channel stuff and not commenting on my code made it a bit tough to decipher. But luckily it didn't take too long to get back into the groove of things, and I was off. Now that I was warmed up, there were a few bugs I had to fix first. To summarize, there were a lot of quote-unquote out-of-bounds issues that kept popping up while testing the code, which led me to basically restructure the entire code base. The end result was a much easier to use system that was less strict, which actually ended up making the rest of this so much easier to deal with later on. So once that code was cleaned up, it was time to focus back on the interactivity. The first step was adding items to empty spaces. Again, it took a while to remember and visualize the grid system, but eventually I figured it out. Generally speaking, from here on out, the codes required to manipulate the grid were very logic-based. For example, in order to place items in empty spaces, all I had to do was check the cell for data. If the cell has no data, that means it's empty, so therefore the data we're currently holding can be placed in the empty space. Then we can reset the temporary data to null. The next step was to stack similar items. Now at first, I had some difficulty getting this to work, like no matter what I tried, it just didn't work. Then I realized I had the code in the wrong place. Again, thanks to the code restructure, this entire process went a lot smoother than I anticipated, and so a lot of overthinking was in fact done. So, moving the code to the proper check, it once again came down to simple logic. If the cell we're hovered over isn't empty, and it so happens to be the same item type, then stack the items into one. This is accomplished by taking the temporary data that we acquired during the drag state and adding it to the current cell data. And once the deed is done, end the drag state. I decided to take a quick detour to fix a nagging issue of the data resetting whenever the mouse leaves the grid. This was an unfortunate side effect of altering the code base. So instead of having the data reset upon leaving the grid area, the data would now only reset if the player clicks outside the grid. Ideally, when used in game, this would probably trigger the items to drop on the floor or something, but for now we're simply going to delete the data. So, at this point we had a grid style based inventory with item management. Placement and stacking are now possible. It was time to start implementing some right click features, starting with stack splitting. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, once again, logic drove our code here. If the cell has data which exceeds more than one in item amount, because we're not doing fractions / decimals here, then split that number in half. From there, update the temp data with the split number and update the cell data with its updated amount. For the most part, this worked out pretty flawlessly. The only issue, and it's one I don't really know how to fix, is that GameMaker is inconsistent with how it halves uneven numbers. Initially, I thought setting one half to round a number up and the other to round down would result in a proper uneven split. However, GameMaker doesn't seem to agree. For example, sometimes it'll split 5 into 3 and 2, but sometimes it'll just split it into 2 and 2. If anyone knows how to fix this, I would really appreciate it. Anyway, I decided to move on because while I'm not good at math, I'm pretty sure this issue was on GameMaker. Next on the list was to allow players to add just one of an amount to a stack. Unsurprisingly, I started overthinking this one. Originally, I feared that the math would break, so I tried to overcompensate with conditionals, but eventually I realized it really wasn't necessary. Because again, the logic here was pretty much all I needed. If the data met criteria similar to the normal item stacking, we were good to go. But instead of adding the whole item amount, simply add 1. Then subtract 1 from the temp data, add 1 to the cell data, and if the temp data was at or below 0, clear the drag state. And finally, it was on to our final feature of the list, item switching. You know the drill, logic carried the code here, but there was a little bit of a twist. Up until now, we've kept track of 2 sets of data, cell data and temporary data. Cell data is data held within the grid, keeping track of all our current items and their amounts. Temporary data is information used for modification purposes when items need to be shifted or updated. When we call for the temporary data, we're reading it from the cell data, and when we need to update cell data, we reference the temporary data. So with item switching, there was a bit of an issue. We had to maintain both cell data and temporary data while also updating both sets of data in order to switch them around. And the answer I came up with was to introduce two new variables that created yet another set of temporary data. So if I haven't lost you at this point, let me explain the logic behind this one. If a cell has data and we've got temp data that isn't the same type as the cell, then we want to switch them around. First, we copy the cell data to the new data group, which I call the transfer data. After the transfer data has been recorded, I then updated the cell data with the temporary data. And then I copied the transfer data to the temporary data. Long story short, I had to copy and shift data between your three different sets of data to achieve item switching in this grid-based inventory system. Whew. And there we have it, a grid-based inventory system that is capable of item stacking, switching, and splitting. It maintains data, updates data, and displays data all from one instance. And something I haven't mentioned until now, it's theoretically pretty flexible. Based on a few defining variables, this thing can be expanded or compacted to any size, and assuming I were to call it using a script or something, it could technically be used multiple times. There are a couple of things that I didn't add, such as stack limits, but again, thanks to simple logic, it shouldn't be difficult to implement. For now, I set out to make a grid-based inventory system, and after a ton of learning the hard way, I managed to build just that. And no doubt it could be optimized and maybe even be done better with more, but I'm proud of this project. I hope not only that you guys enjoyed this journey and this different approach to Let's Dev, but also inspires you to try new things as well. Some of the most common questions I get are, how do I get started, or how do I do this or that, and I always say that you should just go for it. Research, trial, and error are just some of the best ways that I know how to learn, much like you've seen throughout these last few Let's Learn episodes. Anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Let's Dev. Expect this inventory system to show up in future projects, and hopefully we'll be able to grow it into something greater as time goes on. Also, again, if anyone knows how to deal with GameMaker's weird math behavior, please let me know. For now, if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. And as always, be sure to leave your thoughts on our inventory system in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.